It was one of those nights that reminded me why I usually avoided the late shift. The rain was relentless, pounding against my windshield, turning the rural Arkansas roads to a blurry maze of water and darkness. My name's Jason, and I've been driving for a rideshare company for a couple years now. It pays the bills, and most nights it's uneventful. But this night, the atmosphere felt charged, like the storm was just the overture to something more sinister. I was about to call it a night when a ride request came on my app, pulling me out of my thoughts. The pickup location was deep in the back roads, somewhere I hadn't ventured before, even in daylight. The app showed me the passenger's name as Tom, with no profile picture, just a name and a location. Hesitation crept in, but the thought of turning down a fare when business had been slow all evening was just enough to push me to accept. As I navigated the twisting roads, the details of the landscape were swallowed by the night and the downpour, making me rely more on my car's GPS than I liked. Eventually, I reached the designated pickup spot, a dilapidated barn that loomed out of the darkness, like a scene from a horror movie. No house in sight, just the barn, lit by the occasional flash of lightning. I waited, the seconds turning into minutes. The only sound was of the drumming of the rain on the roof of my car, and the occasional distant rumble of the thunder. Just as I was about to cancel the ride and chalk it up to a prank or a mistake, a figure emerged from the shadow of the barn. He was a young guy, maybe early 20s, drenched from head to toe, without a raincoat or umbrella. Something about him set off alarm bells in my head. But out there, in the middle of rural Arkansas, soaked to the skin, he looked more desperate than dangerous. He climbed into the front seat without a word, his clothes making a squelching sound against the fabric. "Thanks for coming out here," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper, as if he was being afraid of being overheard. "I know it's out of the way." I nodded, trying to shake off the unease that clung to me as persistently as the dampness in the air. "It's no problem. Where are we headed?" I asked, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He hesitated, then gave me an address on the other side of the county, further into areas I knew rarely were traveled, especially at night. As I pulled away from the barn, the sense of foreboding grew. This wasn't just another late-night fare. This was something different, something I couldn't quite explain. The rain continued to fall, a constant reminder that tonight was no ordinary night, and I was no ordinary driver. Tonight, I was driving a risk and a liability, and all I could do was follow the road ahead, wherever it might lead. As we drove, the silence in the car grew heavy, punctuated only by the sound of the rain pelting on the roof, and the occasional flicker of lightning that illuminated the surrounding landscape in brief, stark flashes. The deeper into the rural Arkansas backroads we ventured, the more my unease grew. Tom, even if that was his real name, sat quietly, his gaze fixed on the passing shadows outside the window. His initial gratitude for the ride seemed to have evaporated, replaced by a tense anticipation, as if he were bracing himself for something. Attempting to break the silence and maybe ease the growing tension, I tried making small talk. "So, what takes you out this way at this hour?" I asked, glancing at him briefly before focusing back on the road. My headlights were barely cutting through the darkness, the storm turning the night almost as black as pitch. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes darting to mine for a fleeting moment before returning to the window. "Family stuff," he muttered. The vagueness of his answer did nothing to alleviate my concerns, though. Something about the way he said it just didn't sit right with me. It felt rehearsed and too ready. The ride continued in uneasy silence until we reached a particularly secluded stretch of road, trees looming like silent sentinels on either side. It was then that Tom's demeanor changed abruptly. "Stop the car," he said, his voice no longer a whisper, but firm and commanding. Confused and alarmed, I slowed the car to a stop, the beams of my headlights illuminating nothing but the rain-soaked road ahead. "Is everything okay?" I asked, turning to face him. In the dim light of the car's interior, I could see him fumbling with something in his pocket, his movements hurried and desperate. Before I could react though, he leaned over, pushing something cold and metallic into my side. The realization hit me like a punch to a gut. He had a gun. "Just drive," he said, his voice steady now, laced with the threat that chilled me to the bone. "And don't try anything stupid." Panic surged through me, a tidal wave of fear and disbelief. How had a simple ride request turned into this kind of nightmare? But with the gun pressed against my side, I had no choice but to comply. As I pressed the accelerator and the car lurched forward, I realized that this was no ordinary passenger, and I was now a hostage in my own car. With the gun still pressed against my side, the car's interior felt colder, and the storm outside mirrored the chaos unfolding within. The man, Tom, directed me down an even more secluded path, one that seemed to swallow the little light we had. His voice was eerily calm as he revealed the reason for his desperation. "I can't get caught, not after what I've done," he confessed, his words sending a shiver down my spine. He spoke of a crime, a violent act that I will not mention here, but he claimed that was self-defense but had escalated far beyond his control. The weight of his confession hung heavy in the air between us. I was trapped, both by the physical presence of the gun and by the knowledge of his actions. Every turn of the wheel and every mile we covered felt like a step further away from safety. My mind raced, searching for a way out, a way to alert someone without provoking a reaction that could end fatally. Opportunity presented itself unexpectedly though, as Tom, perhaps lost in his own thoughts, momentarily lowered the gun as he looked out the window, seemingly trying to recognize his surroundings in the dark, rain-drenched landscape. Seizing the moment, I slammed on the brakes under the pretense of avoiding an animal on the road. The sudden stop caught him off guard, allowing me to grab the gun and shove it away while simultaneously unlocking the door and bolting out of the car. Rain hammered down as I sprinted through the mud, not daring to look back, my heart pounding in my chest. Ahead, like a beacon in the night, was the faint glow of a convenience store, still open, its lights promising safety. I burst through the door, gasping for breath, and immediately told the worker to call the police. And by some sheer luck, the police arrived within 5 minutes, their presence a stark contrast to the isolation of the night's earlier events. They found Tom still in the car, seemingly resigned to his fate. The gun, it turned out, was actually stolen, and his confession in the car was enough for them to detain him for further questioning. As for the crime he alluded to, it was real, a dispute that had turned deadly, just as he'd said. In the aftermath, I gave my statement to the police. The reality of how close I'd come to being an unintended victim of his panic and poor choices began to settle in. The rideshare company offered support, and local news outlets picked up the story, but none of it could quite erase the memory of that night. The experience left me shaken, questioning the risks of being a late-night driver. I'd always prided myself on being able to read people, to gauge their intentions, but Tom had shattered that confidence. My name's Lucia, and the story took place last year in October. I was holed up in my cozy off-campus apartment, surrounded by textbooks and notes, with the glow of my laptop the only light in the room, besides the occasional flash of lightning. My second-floor apartment, nestled in an older building, always felt like a safe haven, especially on nights like this when the rain created a barrier between me and the rest of the world. The peace and quiet of my solitary study session shattered when I heard it, the unexpected beeping of my smart lock being tampered with. At first, I convinced myself that it was just the sound of the storm playing tricks on me, but then, there it was again, unmistakable this time, the electronic tones of someone trying to key in a code at my door. Heart racing, I tiptoed over to the door, a sense of dread creeping up in my spine. I peered through the digital peephole, half expecting to laugh at myself for being scared of a late-night delivery driver or a neighbor at the wrong apartment. But the screen showed an empty hallway, its usual mundane appearance somehow made sinister by the flickering lights and the shadows they cast. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice sounding alien in the silence that followed the beeping. No reply, just the relentless sound of the rain outside and my own heartbeat pounding in my chest. I stepped back, trying to process what was happening. My apartment, my own territory, suddenly didn't feel so secure. Someone was trying to get in, deliberately attempting to breach the little world I'd built for myself. My phone was in my hand before I knew it, with 911 glowing on the screen. But I hesitated, second-guessing myself. Was I overreacting? Could it just be a glitch, or was there really someone out there in the storm, trying to invade my home? As quickly as it began, this beeping stopped, and I was left standing in the dimly lit silence of my apartment, rain tapping on the windows, wondering if the threat had passed, or if the night's ordeal was just beginning. The silence that followed was almost worse than the beeping. My heart was racing, and every creak of the building set me on edge. I paced back and forth in my living room, trying to convince myself that I was overreacting. It was just a glitch or maybe some prank, having a laugh at my expense. But the quiet of the stormy night felt oppressive, like the calm before the storm that had already arrived. Deciding I needed to do something, anything, I texted my friend Jenna, hoping she was still awake. "Someone's trying to break into my apartment," I typed, my fingers trembling. It sounded so dramatic, so unreal, but seeing the words on my screen made the situation all more tangible. Jenna called me back immediately. Her voice was concerning and confused. "Call the police, Lucia. Now," she insisted. I knew she was right, but part of me still hesitated, clinging to the hope that it was all just a misunderstanding. As I hung up, ready to dial 911, the beeping started again. More insistent this time. Frozen in place, I watched in horror as the digital display on my smart lock began to flash. Someone was outside, right now, trying to force their way in. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't a glitch at all. It was real. Rushing to the window, I peered out into the rain-soaked night, trying to catch a glimpse of whoever was at my door. The parking lot was deserted, the only movement coming from the trees swaying in the wind. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw a shadow move. A figure, hunched and hurried, darting away from the light. My breath caught in my throat. There was someone out there, and they had been trying to get me. Panic set in, a visceral gripping fear that I'd never experienced before. I was alone, truly alone, in a way that the empty apartment had never emphasized until now. The isolation of being the target of someone's unknown intentions on a stormy night was paralyzing. Yet amidst the fear, a survival instinct kicked in. I just couldn't wait around, hoping that they would go up and go away. So I dialed 911, my voice steady despite the chaos of my racing thoughts. As I spoke to the dispatcher, explaining the situation, the seriousness of it all began to sink in. The police were on their way, but in that moment, waiting for them to arrive felt like an eternity. I was trapped in my own home, with an unseen predator lurking just outside. The wait for the police was agonizing, each minute stretching out interminably. I jumped at every sound and every gust of wind that rattled the windows, my imagination conjuring up the worst possible scenarios. It was a relief when I finally saw the flashing light through the rain-streaked windows, a sign that I wasn't alone in this nightmare anymore. The sound of the police sirens cut through the storm, a beacon of hope in the midst of my fear. I had never felt more relief when I saw the red and blue lights flashing outside my window. The police officers arrived quickly, their presence a stark contrast to the solitude and my terror of moments before. I hurried to the door, unlocking it for them, my hands still trembling. The police officers were thorough, checking every inch of my apartment and the surrounding area, and they found no one. But the evidence of the attempted break-in was clear. The smart lock's log showed repeated unauthorized attempts to unlock the door, and the wet footprints in the hallway suggested that the intruder had been very real, not just a figment of my imagination fueled by the storm. One of the officers, a kind woman with a reassuring voice, stayed with me as her partner scoured the exterior. She took my statement, her demeanor calm and professional, yet empathetic. "You did the right thing by calling us," she assured me. "These situations can escalate quickly, and it's better to be safe." The aftermath of that night lingered longer than the storm. The police never caught the person who tried to break into my apartment, but they increased patrols in the area and advised me on additional security measures. I installed a new, more advanced smart lock and invested in a security camera. My sense of security had been shattered, but I was determined to rebuild it piece by piece. The experience left me with a deep-seated wariness of being alone at night, a reminder of how vulnerable we can actually be. It also taught me the importance of trusting my instincts. If something feels off, it probably is. I became more vigilant and became more aware of my surroundings. I often think about that night when I hear the rain against my windows, a reminder of the ordeal I went through. But instead of fear, now feel a sense of resilience. Reminded that even in our darkest moments, there was always a light waiting to cut through the storm, whether it's a flash of police lights or the inner strength we need when we're faced with adversity. Okay, so here's something wild that happened to me not too long ago. I work as a bartender in this little dive bar in a college town. It's usually a chill job, you know, pouring drinks, chatting with the regulars, and just keeping things running smooth. But this one night, man, it was something else. It was pouring rain outside, like one of those heavy, end-of-the-world kind of storms that just drenches everything. Made the whole night feel off, really, right from the start. Most nights I don't mind closing up alone. It's quiet, lets me get my thoughts together. But that night, with the rain hammering down and lightning lighting up the sky, I was feeling a bit on edge. So there I am, wiping down the counters, stacking chairs, the usual routine, when Todd, one of our regulars, decides he wants to stick around and help me close up. Todd's a bit of an odd duck. He keeps to himself mostly, but he's been coming to the bar for a lot of years, so I didn't think much of it. Sure, I could use the company, I told him. Grateful for the help and maybe for the bit of a company too. So Todd and I start getting the place cleaned up. Him taking the tables and me behind the bar. At first it's all good, just typical end of the night stuff. But then, as the sound of the rain kind of fades into the background, Todd starts talking. Now, I've had my fair share of late night confessions at the bar, comes with the territory, but Todd's vibe was different that night. He wasn't just unloading about work or some girl. He was talking in circles about mistakes and bad choices. Real cryptic-like. I'm rinsing out glasses, trying to keep up with his rambling, when he drops this line about how he's done things he ain't proud of. Stuff that could get him in trouble. Not just with the law, but like deep, dark trouble. My hands stopped working for a sec, just soaking in what he's laying down. The air got heavy, thick almost, with this tension that wasn't there before. Man, we all got regrets. I tried to brush it off, keep things light, but he wasn't having any of it. Kept going on about how some folks deserve what's coming to them, and how the rain, like tonight's, always seems to know when to wash things clean. I laughed, a bit uneasy, trying to steer us back to safer waters, but Tom, stuck in his loop, talking about consequences and getting what's owed. The more he talked, the more I wished I wasn't alone with him. It wasn't just the stuff he was saying, it was how he was saying it, like he was confessing but not exactly looking for redemption. Just stating the facts, cold and hard. I kept glancing at the clock, wishing time would hurry up, get us to closing so I could finally lock up and get the hell out of there. As we're winding down, Tom's demeanor shifts, like a switch flipped in him. He leans in, the way someone does when they're about to tell you a secret that could change everything. His voice drops lower, takes on this edge that's both calm and menacing. Stark contrast to the storm that's now just a whisper compared to his words. You know, this world's got a funny way of balancing things out, Tom says, his eyes locked on mine, unblinking. It felt like one of those moments in a movie where the villain just lays out his grand scheme. Except there's no dramatic music, just the hum of the fridge and the distant sound of rain. People think that they can hide from what they've done. think the rain's gonna wash away their sins, but it never really does it? I try to keep my cool, keeping wiping down the bar, but his gaze is like a weight. Everyone's got their stories, Tom, I reply, trying to sound unfazed. But inside I'm reeling. This isn't just some late-night bar talk, it's something else, something darker. He chuckles, a sound that doesn't quite reach his eyes. Stories, yes, but not everyone's story ends the way that they think they will. You ever wonder about that? About how your story's gonna end? The way he phrases it, it's not a question, it's a warning. My heart's racing now, the tension between us thick enough to cut. The room feels smaller, the walls inching closer as he continues. His tale is turning more personal, hinting at actions and consequences. Veiled threats dressed up as casual observations. It's like a psychological game, and he's playing his hand, trying to gauge my reactions, seeing if I'll flinch. I realize then that I'm not just a character of a bartender, listening to regulars' ramblings. I'm a captive audience to a man who's seen and done things that lurk in the shadows of his words. The sense of isolation is now overwhelming. The storm outside no longer a match for the storm Tom's words have conjured inside. I need him to get out. I need to end this night on my own terms, not his. But as I open my mouth to tell him it's time to go, he stands up, his chair scraping against the floor with a finality that echoes in the suddenly too quiet bar. I think I'll call it a night, he says, his voice back to his usual, almost friendly tone. But the threat remains, hanging in the air long after he's gone. After Tom left, the silence of the bar felt oppressive, like the air itself was heavy with his unspoken threats. I took a moment to steady my nerves, the echo of our conversation replaying in my head. It wasn't just the things he said, but the way he said them, with a conviction that chilled me to the bone. I knew I couldn't just let it go. The feeling in my gut told me that this was serious. So the next day, still rattled by the encounter, I decided to take action. I reached out to a friend on the local police force, not sure if what I had was enough to warrant concern. He's been coming around for years, but last night was different, I explained, my voice tight with anxiety. My friend promised to look into it, to see if Tom had any history that might explain his behavior. I tried to keep to my routine, to not let the fear take hold, but the bar felt different now, tainted by the memory of that night. It wasn't long before I got a call from my friend on the force. You were right to be worried, he said, his tone serious. We did some digging and found out he's been involved in some, let's just say, hate groups. The dangerous ones. And we're moving in to pick him up. The news hit me like a punch to the stomach. Hate groups. The idea that someone like that had been a regular at my bar and that I'd served him, joked with him, was horrifying. The reality of the danger I'd been in, unbeknownst to me, was a stark reminder of the world's complexities and the masks people wear. The day Tom was arrested, the bar was quiet. Word had gotten out, and the regulars were just as shocked as I was. The atmosphere was somber, a community grappling with the revelation that evil had been in their midst, disguised as one of their own. In the weeks that followed, I found myself reflecting on that night, on the warning signs I'd almost missed, and I became more vigilant, more aware of the responsibility I had to ensure my bar was a safe place for everyone. The encounter with Tom had shaken me, but it also awakened a resolve I didn't know I had. The story of what happened spread through the town, a tale of darkness that hid in plain sight. For me, it was just a reminder of the importance of trusting my instincts, and of speaking up when something doesn't feel right. The bar continues now to be a place of warmth and welcome, but with a new layer of awareness. The last call that night brought a storm into my life, but it also cleared the air, leaving behind a clearer, if more cautious, view of the world.